Let's deal with Centro. I call this one the harrowing tale of human failure. Here we have a company which was a shopping center owner. It was called the Centro Group. It's a classic story of greed and stupidity, I call it. Led by former Coles Mayor Executive Andrew Scott, we won't get into the names, Centro used enormous amounts of leverage to create a commercial property empire. In 2007 and 8, Centro announced $2 billion losses. The following year, a further $3.5 billion. These astronomical losses represented how much management overpaid for assets. Well, like all corporate collapses, no one got anything. On the 27th of June, 2011, which is last year, not so long ago, in the federal courts of Australia, Justice Middleton, God bless him, handed down a landmark decision regarding corporate governance practices in Australia, and they will affect our corporate governance practices in South Africa. Our constitution makes provision for any court, any tribunal in this country to make use of foreign laws. So quite clearly, our constitution allows for such issues. Middleton concluded that being honest in error is no protection against failure in diligence. So you might have made an honest mistake, but if you did not do the due diligence that you should have, you will be considered negligent. In the end, Centro's directors, now when we talk about Centro's directors, we include audit committees. It's those non-executive, independent directors on audit committees were found equally culpable and equally liable to the executive directors. Now, the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, they decided to pursue negligence charges against these directors because of incorrect disclosure between short-term and long-term liabilities. You've got to ask yourself the difference between, everybody should know the difference between a short-term liability and a long-term liability. Does everybody know? Well, obviously, the auditors didn't, and nor did the directors. Well, I just need to put this. IFRS is heavy. Unfortunately, the biggest lesson learned from the Centro case is the following. Knowledge is power. You've got to dress yourself up, and you've got to train and become not an expert in the accounting. But what you've got to know as an audit committee member is whether it acts like a duck. That's the key, isn't it? Because everybody can look at a set of rules and say, you know what, it looks like a duck. But really, at the end of the day, we've got to know that it acts like a duck. The audit committee non-executive defense. What was the defense? You know what, let's rely on the auditors. It says company's management and the external auditor had reviewed the financial statements and the director's report. So let's rely on the auditors. It's the auditors that should be relying on management, not the other way around. We are there to do a special job, not for management to rely on us. It's the shareholders and the directors, the shareholders and third parties and the public and the community as a whole that rely on us. We are there to spy on management on behalf of the shareholders. That's what auditors are. We're not spies in the true sense of the word, but at the end of the day, we are there to work for the community and for the shareholders. And the lesson learned for audit committee members is, yes, to discuss and to talk to the external auditors and hold them accountable, just as they will do to the internal auditors. And to use that 3 lines of defense as an important cog in the corporate governance structure, to integrate internal, external, and management as well. The question before Justice Middleton was, the directors of public listed companies are required to apply their own minds. A key issue was the extent to which a director relied on the competency of those who deliver information. At the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, you can rely on other people, but you must make a considered reliance. You must investigate whether the person you are relying on is in fact an expert in that field. Just because a person is an accountant doesn't mean they know about hedging strategies. Doesn't mean they know about fair value accounting. Doesn't mean they know about the industry they work in. And that brings another lesson learned. People sitting on the audit committee must know the industry. It's not a matter of just being a CA or a lawyer or an engineer, whatever it might be. You've got to know that industry. Because accounting standards, there is a rule. It says you must debit this, credit that, and this is what an asset is. But I can tell you now from personal experience, a provision or an asset is not the same in the aviation industry as it is in the telecommunications industry. They are different. It's got to act like a duck. Because in the aviation industry and the airline industry, the aviation telecommunications industry, they both look like a duck. But I can tell you now, they act differently. Provisions are different in the various industries, and assets act differently. Parmalat. Well, Parmalat I can run through quite quickly. Parmalat was owned by a family called it was the Tanzi family. The Tanzi family, it was a clear case of nepotism. They were head of the senior family member was head of the audit committee, was the CEO, the financial director. And if you think that doesn't happen in South Africa, someone at the JSE says trouble follows me wherever I go. I was involved in a case exactly like that, where there was one gentleman who was the CEO, who was the CFO, and was chair of the audit committee. The JSE fined that gentleman 1 million rand. That's how serious they take it. And must be the reportable irregularity king. I reported a reportable irregularity there. It is wrong to do those type of things. Morally, ethically, and legally. There's a lesson to be learned. WorldCom was once a well-respected, high-flying success story in the telecommunications industry. It was leading. It was like Enron. An expert within the telecom industry experience recalled not being able to understand WorldCom's profitability. So here's an expert saying, I don't understand what these figures look like. They don't act like anything anyway. Even after analyzing his public financial statements and comparing the results to his own company's numbers. The audit committee's role in the collapse is perhaps the most studied amongst all modern cases in financial fraud. This is in textbooks all over the world, this audit committee failure. And it resulted, ladies and gentlemen, please note, I did this on purpose. It resulted in a class action. Section 157.1 of our new Companies Act talks about class actions. So just beware. Class actions means really that obviously I can't afford to sue a director or a company, but you know what, I'll get 10 other guys to put in 100 rand each, and we can group it as one. It allowed serious failure of communication between itself. Amazing. Guess who the auditors were again? Arthur Andersen. And at the end of the day, Arthur Andersen were never found guilty of anything. Reputational risk is quite damaging. The audit committee failed to establish a strong reporting mechanism between itself and the internal audit department. As a result, internal audit department fell under the control of the company management. Moreover, the audit committee should have known Andersen and the internal audit department rarely connected. The relationship between, here's a lesson, the relationship between external and internal audit is of vital importance. And that is something the audit committee should be monitoring at all times. As a result, internal audit and Arthur Andersen, according to the liquidator's report, were two ships passing in the night. It's as if they were doing two completely separate things and at the cost to the company. The improper relationship with the external auditor was evident in part. The expert we interviewed, I got this from certain research, said the fact that the fees were being paid to the auditors were really small. So in other words, the audit fees were so low in relation to consulting fees. That's why you've got to separate. Non-audit services should be really carefully examined by the audit committee. I'm going to skip a little bit. Let's just get to Royal Ahold. Was a well-respected grocery market chain and expanded in the West Netherlands to a global corporation. Company was very successful, growed. By early 2002, its growth had outstripped its management capabilities. So in other words, it grew so quickly that it didn't have management or the corporate governance structures to take care of that growth. And they obviously denied any wrongdoing when it collapsed. In the 2001 annual report, Ahold confirmed what investors had dreaded. During the ensuing crisis, the board members and management maintained a distant attitude, with one board member saying, listen and read carefully, "We are grocers, not accountants or bankers." Well, I can tell you now, as we see what the definition of financial literacy, and you see what King 3 says, you've got to be a bit of a lawyer, you've got to be a bit of an accountant, you've got to be a little bit on the social ethics side, you've got to know a little bit of everything. In fact, Regulation 42 of the Companies Act Regulations 2011 says, a third must be legal, a third must be accounting, and third must be, I think, human resources, etc. So you've got to have a general split on your audit committee. Aild's audit committee process had to be rebuilt from the ground up. I'm going to stop there. The lessons, ladies and gentlemen, learnt is the most important thing on the audit committee is simply to understand, not to know. You also have to, there's some other issues that I believe that audit committees, people on audit committees should be able to go into the company, speak to the people, look at reports. In fact, make yourself part, even though you're independent, non-executive, you should be part of that company. You cannot hope to know what's going on as an independent, non-executive member of that audit committee if you just simply sit at each meeting. Between meetings, the job is done between meetings. You've got to get an understanding of the company culture. You've got to understand what the books look like. Otherwise, you'll never know whether the numbers actually act like a duck. Thank you.